Hello, I'm Sophie Ikenya. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. Evidence obtained by the BBC contradicts the official explanation for the cause of an explosion which killed 23 people in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, earlier this year. After a wave of unrest in Ethiopia in June, several leading opposition figures are among 24 people charged with terrorism. Police in Uganda make 2 arrests as they investigate the fire that destroyed part of Makerere University, one of the oldest in Africa. Also in the program, all the sports news with Peter.
Yes, and the former first vice president of the Confederation of African Football tells the BBC there are cracks within the continental body.
Well, thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Now, new evidence obtained by BBC Africa Eye contradicts the official explanation for the cause of an explosion that rocked Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, in March. 23 people were killed and a girls' boarding school destroyed. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, that's the country's state-owned oil firm, claimed the explosion was caused by a truck that hit gas cylinders near one of their pipelines. But a BBC investigation reveals this wasn't the reason for the blast, which decimated over 100,000 square meters of Lagos. Ogechi Obidiebube reports.
When the explosion hit Shoba, a suburb of Lagos, shortly before 9 a.m., almost 300 children were gathering for morning mass at Bethlehem Girls' College. The next second, the school was gone. Miraculously, not a single girl died in the blast. But the school's principal, Sister Henrietta Aluka, was one of 23 people killed. More than 500 people were made homeless, including Oluchi Adiego and her children, David and Favor.
Immediately, I don't know what happened to me. The thing affected my eyes. Even up till now, I cannot see with these eyes. This right hand side of it, I cannot see with it.
Her daughter, Favor, was rescued unhurt, but her son, David, was badly injured. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, or NNPC, which is the state-owned oil firm, said it was caused by a truck that hit gas cylinders near one of its pipelines. Among the many videos shot that day, BBC Africa Eye found one that was filmed at 8:51 a.m., 5 minutes before the blast. It shows that before anything had ignited, there was a major leak of vaporized liquid. It also gives us a precise location for that leak, behind this truck, which also became the center of the blast. We consulted 3 specialist engineers who confirmed that a leak of this intensity could not be coming from gas cylinders. Drone footage shows the truck was burned out in the blast. The evidence we have collected indicates that this heavily laden truck stopped on an eroded, untarred road that had been softened by rainwater. This could have pressured the pipeline to breaking point, releasing a cloud of vaporized flammable liquid that ignited. The maintenance and integrity of the country's petroleum pipelines is the sole responsibility of the Nigerian Pipelines and Storage Company, which is a subsidiary of the NNPC. Industry regulations also require the NNPC to protect the pipeline from washouts and from being subjected to abnormal loads. Dr. Ambisisi Ambituni, a Nigerian engineer and academic, has been warning about the danger of this pipeline for years.
It was designed to last for only 25 years. Now the pipeline has been in existence for way over the lifespan of the pipeline. Now if you merge all these things together, what you have is a recipe for disaster. A pipeline that is weakened in terms of its integrity, a cover of the pipeline that is eroded, and a truck driving on such an environment.
We put our findings to the NNPC. They told us their pipelines are strictly compliant with safety and regulatory guidelines. They also denied the pipeline was inadequately protected, said there was no leakage before the explosion, and reaffirmed their explanation for its cause. 6 months later, Oluchi, David and Favor are still homeless, living in a relief camp. But the pipeline has already reopened and the danger has not gone away. Ogechi Obidiebube, BBC News, Lagos.
Now let's bring you up to date on a story we've been following. A military tribunal in Cameroon has sentenced 5 soldiers each to 10 years in jail for their part in the killing of 2 women and their 2 children in 2015. A 5th soldier was sentenced to 2 years for filming and sharing videos of the incident. Now, they were brought to trial after a video of the shootings was shared on social media. Now, the women and children were blindfolded, forced to the ground and shot 22 times. The Cameroon government initially denied that soldiers were involved. BBC Africa's Africa Eye team investigated footage of the killings and identified the soldiers who carried it out. Now, prominent opposition figures are among 24 people who've been charged with terrorism in Ethiopia. The charges are in connection with a wave of ethnic unrest in June following the killing of a popular Oromo singer, Hachalu Hundessa. More than 150 people died in the unrest. Jawar Mohammed, a media mogul turned opposition politician, was among those charged. The BBC's Kalkidan Yibeltal reports from Addis Ababa.
It has been more than 2 months since thousands suspected of possible involvement in the violence that shook the country's capital and its largest state, Oromia, were arrested. And now, terrorism and other criminal charges are filed against some of the prominent opposition figures. Jawar Mohammed, Baqqala Garba and Iskandar Nagga are all charged under Ethiopia's anti-terror law. And on Monday, Jawar and Baqqala appeared in court for the first time since their terror charges were announced over the weekend. Speaking in court, Jawar said that he and others were locked up because they were perceived to be threats in coming elections for the ruling Prosperity Party. At least 160 people were killed in the unrest, including ethnic and religious minorities who were recipients of mob attacks. Critics have expressed concern about the slow progresses of the suspects' court cases. But authorities often responded saying that the depths and breadth of the damage incurred during the unrest demanded time-consuming investigation. And if history is any indication, it's reasonable to expect that these court cases will go on for some time to come. Kalkidan Ibeltal, BBC News, Addis Ababa.
Now, 500 pupils have been put into quarantine after a coronavirus outbreak at a school in South Africa's Eastern Cape province. 98 pupils tested positive at the secondary school in the town of Burgersdorp, and officials say they fear the virus may have spread more widely into the community. It comes as South Africa eased lockdown regulations to level 1 today after 6 months of a hard lockdown. Well, let's go to the BBC's Nomsa Maseko, who is in Johannesburg for us. Nomsa, how did we get here and exactly what happened?
Well, this is a shock to the country, as you know, that they are now trying to ease the lockdown regulations, and also the number of infections have also lowered in the country. But it has emerged that 98 school pupils from Etembeni High School in the Eastern Cape tested positive. This comes after 2 pupils tested positive and then failed to report that to the school. And the authorities there say that the reason why there was such a huge outbreak was because people there are not maintaining social distancing regulations and have also not been wearing masks. So now, as a result, there has been a team of health experts along with health officials who have now been taken down to that province for contact tracing.
So what exactly are they doing? You say these health experts have been taken down. What specifically are they doing?
Well, the number of people who have been in contact with others is obviously staggering, because it's not just the pupils at the school, but it's also in communities and also their families. So primary contact tracing is now taking place in the town of Burgersdorp, because the health department fears dire consequences if contact tracing is not done immediately.
Now, South Africa has eased lockdown regulations to level 1 today. Are there concerns at all from all the quarters, people in South Africa, health workers?
Well, following a strict lockdown which lasted for 6 months, people are still scared about what can they expect. But the reopening of the economy has been first and foremost in the minds of many, particularly those who have lost their jobs, and also allowing more freedom of people to be able to move around. But the country's health minister has warned that the coronavirus battle is far from over.
All right, Nomsa Maseko for us there in Johannesburg. Thank you for that update. Thank you. Let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. The Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has announced a further easing of coronavirus restrictions in spite of continuing rise in the number of new infections. Mr. Museveni said the measures could not remain in place indefinitely because the economy was suffering. International borders will be reopened for tourists, while returning Ugandan citizens who have tested negative will be allowed to self-isolate at home. Now, the Ministry of Health blames the rise in infections on growing public complacency about social distancing and the wearing of masks. Now, the military rulers of Mali have appointed a former defense minister, Ba Ndao, seen here on the right, as the president of a transitional government due to return the country to civilian rule in 18 months. He'll be sworn in on Friday, announcing the appointment for state television. On state television, the coup leader, Colonel Assimi Goita, said he himself would become vice president. Now, the cause of mysterious deaths of large numbers of elephants in Botswana has been found to be a toxic bacteria. The authorities say they were killed by cyanobacteria, which occurs naturally in standing water and can grow into large blooms known as blue-green algae. Many of the dead elephants were found near watering holes. Officials say 330 elephants are now known to have died, and conservationists have expressed growing alarm at the effect on Botswana's elephant population. Now, a high-level Sudanese delegation headed by this man, as the country's leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has arrived in the United Arab Emirates to negotiate with American officials as the country tries to get removed from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Now, it's been on that list since 1993 after the U.S. accused Sudan of giving Al-Qaeda and its leader, Osama bin Laden, technical and financial support for terrorist activities. Well, let's bring in the BBC's correspondent, Samir Hashmi. He joins us from Dubai. Thanks for taking time to talk to us, Samir. There's some key issues that the Sudanese delegation wants. For example, and I'll quote this, they want the removal of the name of Sudan from the list of states sponsoring terrorism. What will be the impact of this if this happens on Sudan?
Well, it's a big deal if it goes through for Sudan, because as you mentioned, that Sudan has been on the list since 1993, which is close to 27 years, or rather 27 years. Now, because Sudan is on this list, it doesn't allow Sudan companies or companies based in Sudan to use dollars for any international trade, business, or to access a loan from international markets. And that has made things really difficult for Sudan, not only now, but over the last 2.5 decades, because it's really difficult for them to raise money. And now, given that the economic situation has deteriorated in the country over the last couple of years, especially after the fall of al-Bashir, it's become really, really difficult for Sudan to meet those challenges. And that's why they desperately need access to international markets, apart from aid from the United States and the UAE.
Now, remind us what the connection was with Osama bin Laden in this case.
Well, the US had accused in 1993 that the government at that point of time was harboring Islamic militant groups, including the likes of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and it had named some other groups as well. But things got worse after 1993. In 1997, the US imposed even harsher economic comprehensive sanctions, which made it even more difficult. And that was not the last time we saw the United States imposing sanctions. In 2007 also, the US went ahead and imposed further sanctions when there was conflict in Darfur. So it's been a series of sanctions. And even though Sudan has been cooperating with the United States after 9/11, they've really not been able to convince them to remove them from that list. And if you look at that list of states sponsoring terrorism, there are only 4 countries on it: Sudan, North Korea, Syria, and Iran. And whoever's on that list, for them accessing international markets is virtually impossible.
Speaking of the US, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has raised the issue of Sudan establishing ties with Israel, but Sudan now says it has no mandate to do so. I wonder why the ties with Israel is such a sensitive issue for Sudan.
Well, it is a really, really sensitive issue because if you look historically, Sudan has been at the forefront in terms of opposing Israel and backing the Palestinian cause. And Sudan, along with the other Muslim countries from across the globe, has been at the forefront. And now, given that the US is pressurizing Sudan that they would remove them from the list in return for them to sign an agreement with Israel, it is a really sensitive issue. In fact, in February, when we had Al-Burhan meeting the Prime Minister of Israel, there were protests in Sudan. And that's why it's a very tricky issue. And right now, given that there is the coalition is a mix of a civilian government and a military, they have to tread this issue very cautiously. But now I think there's a realization in Sudan that they need that economic aid desperately. And in return, if the US does that, if they sign a deal with Israel, then they are looking or considering that. We don't know whether that will happen or not. Probably the talks this week would decide that, but it is definitely a very, very sensitive issue.
Indeed. Samir Hashmi for us there in Dubai. Thank you for that update. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come on the program, Peter joins us with all the sports, with news of which countries across the continent are easing restrictions to usher in the return of professional sports. I'm Sophie Ikenye and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Police in Uganda are investigating the cause of a fire that destroyed part of the country's oldest universities, Makerere, over the weekend. They say they've arrested an officer and a private security guard. Flames swept through the main administration block, known locally as the Ivory Tower, a prominent landmark in Kampala. Makerere was first established in 1922 and grew into one of Africa's best-known universities. Patience Atuhaire reports from the capital, Kampala.
It is the most recognizable symbol of the nearly century-old university. Now, the administration is not sure if they will salvage any part of this iconic building in Kampala. Firefighters spent most of Sunday trying to bring the blaze under control. It is said to have started from one of the offices on the 3rd floor, burning through wooden partitions and most of the roof of the university's main administrative building. The fire then spread through the building's 3 stories, barely sparing anything but the basement. Financial records and numerous valuable documents are said to have been burnt to ashes. The whole top floor caved in, according to Professor Barnabas Nawangwe, the Vice-Chancellor. Cracks can also be seen in several of the outer walls. Makerere's leaders say they'll assess the extent of the damage and move to rebuild as soon as possible. The university is just a month away from reopening for finalists, having been closed since March due to the coronavirus pandemic. Authorities have said that the destruction caused by the fire will not affect the measures being put in place for the reopening. Patience Atuhaire, BBC News, Kampala.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's time now for some sport with Peter. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Very good to have you back. Now, there are cracks within the Confederation of African Football. That's according to a man who should know. Amachul Pinnick is the head of the Nigerian Football Federation and was, until July last year, first vice president of CAF and a member of the organizing committee for FIFA competitions. In a wide-ranging interview with the BBC today, Pinnick says all's not well within the continental body. Here's a clip of some of what he said.
Truth is, when we started our mission to rejuvenate, to effect a change in CAF, the dream was to have whoever is there, like the incumbent, to be there for 12 years, the statutory period, and some big countries that can have very vocal and strong voices going to the council, the FIFA Council, which is the highest decision-making body, in club foot, in FIFA. And that was the dream. But you can see that in CAF today, there are challenges that we consider quite fundamental. Our dream of attaining that goal, where we achieve, there are a lot of issues, that we are looking at. So I don't have any issues with the leadership. If, for example, Ahmad decides to run, and if he decides to also change his ways and listen to reason at every point in time, we're all human beings. And that is the truth. We're all human beings. You shouldn't just zero everything on one or two persons. No. You shouldn't just look at ethnocentrism. You should look at the bigger picture. You should look at Africa as a continent and what is my impact. And you mean to start bringing in suspicion. That is the issue. Give everybody that sense of direction, that sense of belonging. No matter how the smallest, even Sao Tome and Principe, let them feel that they can win the World Cup one day. Let Djibouti feel that they can win the Nations Cup one day. Give them that sense. Give the administrators that sense of love. Nothing plastic, nothing cosmetic, nothing deceitful. There are a lot of things that we see in CAF. I just look at them and I laugh.
Very interesting. And we'll have more on that interview later this week. Meanwhile, despite the rising cases of COVID-19 in the world, several African countries are following Europe in taking steps to remove restrictions on professional sports within their borders. The latest are Uganda and Ghana. Oluwashina Okeleji has more.
Sport is gradually returning on the continent. In Ghana, President Nana Akufo-Addo has given the go-ahead for contact sports to return in the West African nation. Fans are expected to stay clear of the training facilities, while players, technical and management staff are expected to undergo mandatory COVID tests. Stadiums are limited to just 25% capacity for the sports to resume in Ghana. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the sports minister Sunday Dare has warned that there will be no football in Nigeria until clubs and states comply with the directives for proper football to resume in the country. And from west to east, Ugandan President Museveni has given the nod for all open-air sporting activities to resume in the country, provided spectators are not allowed in. Players and officials are tested 72 hours before the event. He also emphasized that no mask should be worn during strenuous exercises by athletes. For Focus on Africa Sports, Oluwashina Okeleji in Lagos.
All right. And finally, how about this? A Macau stopped play at a training match for Brazil's women's football team last Saturday after it landed on a player. Extraordinary. The team were in the middle of play in Rio de Janeiro when the bird suddenly landed on player Bruna Benitez's head. It eventually flew off Benitez and towards the goalpost, after which play returned. You could say that was a high-flying game of football. Like I said, Sophie, good to have you back. I know you've been very busy during lockdown, but I hope you've kept in touch with all the sports.
Yes, I have. And thank you for keeping me up to speed anyway. But don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm at C Kenyan. That's all from the program. Thank you for your company. Bye-bye.